Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Mabez Aslam and I am resident at Benazir Bhutto Hospital in ENT, and I am the mentor for the FCPS-1 online course, which is a project between StudyMate and MedExam Expert. I welcome you all to our free webinar series. So today we will be talking about paranasal sinuses. So paranasal sinuses is a very important topic for FCPS Part 1 exam. So we will be starting with some Cpsp MCQs. So first Cpsp MCQ, आपको जिसको भी आंसर पता है वो प्लीज जो जूम पे है हमारे साथ वो चैट बॉक्स में लिखते हैं, और जो फेसबुक लाइव पे हमारे साथ हैं वो कमेंट्स में कमेंट कर दें. Which of the following sinuses are usually present at birth? A is sphenoid and frontal, B is maxillary and ethmoid, C is maxillary and sphenoid, and D is sphenoid and ethmoid. So आपको जो भी आंसर करेक्ट लगता है वो अभी काइंडली आप कमेंट कर दें. We will review these questions by the end of the session to test your knowledge and your understanding. Okay, I can see some answers. So next MCQ is maxillary sinus opens into A is superior meatus, B is middle meatus, C is inferior meatus, and D is nasal septum. So whatever option you think is correct, please comment in chat box or on comment section of Facebook Live. So third MCQ is, which paranasal sinus is the first to develop in intrauterine life? A is maxillary sinus, B is frontal sinus, C is sphenoid sinus, and D is ethmoid sinus. Okay, I can see some answers. The fourth Cpsp MCQ is, posterior ethmoid sinus drains into superior meatus, B is middle meatus, C is inferior meatus, and D is sphenoethmoidal recess. So whatever answer you think is correct, please comment in the chat box. Okay, so now we will be starting with the session. So what do you understand by paranasal sinuses? So sinuses means air containing cavity. And for paranasal, you can understand that they are around the nose. So paranasal sinus का मतलब हुआ कि air containing cavities around the nose. So we basically have 4 pairs of paranasal sinuses. These paranasal sinuses are divided into 2 groups. There is an anterior group and there is a posterior group. So if we look at the anterior group, if we draw a line here dividing the sinuses, ठीक है, जो इसके आगे हैं लाइन के, they are the anterior group, whereas जो लाइन के जो पीछे हैं वो हो गए posterior group में. So in anterior group हमारे पास है frontal sinus, उसके बाद है maxillary sinus और anterior ethmoidal cells. और अगर हम posterior group की बात करें तो posterior group में हमारे पास है sphenoid sinus और posterior ethmoidal cells. Anterior group के जो common बात है that they all open in the middle meatus. We will look at that in detail in the next slide. Whereas posterior group में each sinus की अपनी opening है. Posterior ethmoids open into the superior meatus, whereas the sphenoid open into the sphenoethmoidal recess. So quickly reviewing this slide, we have four pairs of air containing cavities in the skull around the nose, which are known as paranasal sinuses. These sinuses are divided into two groups, anterior group and a posterior group. Anterior group में हमारे पास है maxillary sinus, frontal sinus और anterior ethmoidal sinuses. Posterior group में we have posterior ethmoidal sinuses and the sphenoid sinus. So this is a very important slide and I can confidently say कि आपको CPSP Part 1 एग्जाम में इस स्लाइड में से at least 2 to 3 MCQs आएंगे. So on this slide you can see the lateral wall of the nose. Okay, so lateral nasal wall of the nasal cavity mein we have three turbinates. There are three shelf-like projections: the superior turbinate, middle turbinate, and inferior turbinate. Below each turbinate जो area होता है उसको हम कहते हैं meatus. Superior turbinate के नीचे होता है superior meatus. Middle turbinate के नीचे होता है middle meatus. और inferior turbinate के नीचे जो area होता है उसको कहते हैं inferior meatus. ठीक है, पिछली स्लाइड में हमने देखा था कि all the anterior group of the paranasal sinuses they open into the middle meatus. So anterior ethmoid, maxillary or frontal sinus they have a common opening in the middle meatus. जो posterior ethmoidal air cells होते हैं they open into the superior meatus. Whereas above the superior turbinate जो area होता है उसको हम कहते हैं sphenoethmoidal recess. इसमें खुलता है sphenoid sinus. और inferior meatus में एक duct open होती है जो carry करती है lacrimal secretions जिसको हम कहते हैं nasolacrimal canal. वो inferior meatus में open होती है. So quickly reviewing this slide, we have three turbinates on the lateral wall of the nose: superior turbinate, middle turbinate and inferior turbinate. हर turbinate के नीचे वाले एरिया को कहते हैं meatus. superior के नीचे होता है superior meatus, middle के नीचे होता है middle meatus और inferior के नीचे होता है inferior meatus. और superior turbinate के ऊपर जो एरिया होता है उसको हम कहते हैं sphenoethmoidal recess. Sphenoethmoidal recess में sphenoid sinus open होते हैं. Superior meatus में posterior ethmoidal air cells open होते हैं. Middle meatus में there is a common opening of the anterior group of the paranasal sinuses, which include anterior ethmoidal air cells, maxillary sinuses, and the frontal sinuses. Whereas in inferior meatus there is an opening for the nasolacrimal duct. So now we will be discussing the important points of each paranasal sinus. So सबसे बड़ा और जो सबसे पहले डेवलप होने वाला साइनस होता है वो मैक्सिलरी साइनस होता है. Maxillary sinus is the first to develop. It is the largest paranasal in sinus in size, and it is also known as the maxillary antrum or the antrum of Highmore. High means zyada and more also means zyada. So it is known as maxillary antrum and the antrum of Highmore. And maxillary sinus reaches adult size by the age of 15 years. The volume of the maxillary sinus is 15 ml and it reaches the adult size by the age of 15 years. Maxillary sinus में अगर आप देखें जो ये डेंटिस्ट्री और ईएनटी कैंडिडेट्स के लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है, It is in close relation to the upper molar teeth. So teeth की यूजुअली जो भी इन्फेक्शन होती है उसकी सबसे पहले जो स्प्रेड होता है वो यूजुअली मैक्सिलरी साइनस में स्प्रेड करते हैं. So this is important from clinical point of view. Next we have the ethmoid sinus. Ethmoid sinus are divided into two groups and they are second to develop in the intrauterine life. ठीक है, the anterior and posterior ethmoids drain separately into the nasal cavity. Anterior जैसे हमने पहले देखा था कि it is a part of the anterior group of the paranasal sinus and they all join together to drain into the middle meatus, whereas posterior ethmoids drain into the superior meatus. Okay, this is again a very important table which has been taken from Dhingra. तो आप में से जो फुटबॉल के फैंस हैं उन्होंने एक प्लेयर का नाम सुना होगा, मेसी. So this is a mnemonic to remember this table. Okay, Messi fan. इस टेबल में अगर आप देखें जो maxillary और ethmoid sinus हैं, they are present at birth. Okay, whereas the sphenoid and the frontal sinus are absent at birth. Maxillary sinus are the first to appear on X-ray by the age of 5 months, whereas the frontal are the last to appear on X-ray by the age of 6 years. और frontal sinus जो होता है, it reaches the adult size in the end by the age of 20 years. ठीक है, तो इसमें अब आपको जो important points हैं वो आपको इस mnemonic से याद रहेंगे, मेसी फैन से, MESF. The first two letters, maxillary and the ethmoid, are present at birth, whereas the sphenoid and the frontal are absent at birth. Maxillary sinus first appears on X-ray by the age of 5 months, जबकि frontal sinus is the last to appear on X-ray by the age of 6 years. And frontal sinus reaches adult size by the age of 20 years. So you must remember at least these highlighted points from this table. Next, we will be quickly reviewing the functions of the paranasal sinuses. The first function of the paranasal sinus is the conditioning of the inspired air. As you all know कि जो भी हम air inspire करते हैं और जब हम expire करते हैं तो उसमें से कुछ air जो होती है वो paranasal sinuses में इकट्ठी हो जाती है और जब next time हम air inspire करते हैं तो वो air पुरानी air new air के साथ mix होकर lungs तक जाती है. और उसकी वजह से जो टेम्परेचर होता है और जो ह्यूमिडिटी होती है वो रेगुलराइज हो जाती है उसकी. नंबर 2, दे ऐड टू द रेजोनेंस ऑफ द वॉइस. के जो पैरानेजल साइनसेस हैं दे ऐड टू द एको ऑफ द वॉइस. तो जो पेशेंट्स आपके पास साइनोसाइटिस के आते हैं दे हैव अ हाइपो रेजोनेंट वॉइस. हाइपो रेजोनेंट के वजह ये होती है कि उनके साइनसेस में फ्लूइड होता है इंस्टेड ऑफ एयर, उसकी वजह से उनकी रेजोनेंस कम होती है. Paranasal sinuses also provide thermal insulation to the important contents of the orbit and brain from the temperature variations. कि जो air होती है, it is a poor conductor of heat, so it provides good thermal insulation to the sensitive organs. Paranasal sinus lighten the skull bones. They act as a buffer against trauma to the brain, and they have a local immunological defense because of the mucin secreted in the paranasal sinuses. हिस्टोलॉजी ऑफ द पैरानेजल साइनसेस में आपको सिर्फ एक बात याद रखनी है कि दे आर लाइंड बाय सिलिएटेड columnar epithelium with goblet cells. ठीक है, this is very frequently asked in ENT part 1 exam कि histology of paranasal sinuses बताएं, लंग्स की जो लाइनिंग है उसका बताएं, ओरल कैविटी की लाइनिंग बताएं, यूस्टिशियन ट्यूब की लाइनिंग बताएं. So you should try to remember all these types of epithelium in various parts of the human body. So इसमें अगर आप देखें, इस डायग्राम में भी दे रहा सिलिया, ठीक है, जो सेल्स हैं वो कलमनर टाइप के हैं और इनके दरमियान में एक गॉबलेट सेल्स हैं जो सेक्रेशन प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, जिनकी एक लेयर इन सिलिया के ऊपर होती है. सो हिस्टोलॉजी ऑफ द पैरानेजल साइनस, इसमें सिर्फ एक चीज याद रखनी है कि दे आर लाइंड बाय द सिलिएटेड कलमनर एपिथेलियम विद गॉबलेट सेल्स. So this brings us to the end of the topic. Now we will be quickly discussing the CPSP MCQs जो आपके साथ शुरू में शेयर किए थे. Okay, so the first MCQ again, which of the following sinuses are usually present at birth? So I hope आप answers ज़्यादा correct होंगे. So all those who think it is A, sphenoid and frontal, B, maxillary and ethmoid, C is maxillary and sphenoid, D is sphenoid and ethmoid, please comment in the chat box. Okay, I can see many correct answers in the chat box of Zoom. So paranasal sinuses, इसका आंसर करेक्ट है बी, maxillary and ethmoid sinus. So you can remember from the mnemonic shared previously, messy fan, the first two letters they denote to the sinuses which are present at birth. So maxillary और ethmoid present होते हैं, whereas sphenoid और जो frontal sinus होते हैं वो absent होते हैं at birth. So next MCQ we have maxillary sinus opens into which meatus? Superior meatus, middle meatus, C is for inferior meatus, and D is nasal septum. So what do you think is the correct answer? Yes, almost everyone has answered correctly that maxillary sinus open into the middle meatus. Maxillary sinus is part of the anterior group of the paranasal sinuses. They all join together to open together in middle meatus. Okay, so which paranasal sinus is the first to develop in intrauterine life? So what do you think is correct answer? Is it A, maxillary sinus, B, frontal sinus, C, sphenoid sinus, and D is ethmoid sinus? So again, almost everyone has commented correctly that it is A, the maxillary sinus. Okay, so the last MCQ of today, the Cpsp past MCQ is posterior ethmoid sinus drains into A, superior meatus, B, middle meatus, C, inferior meatus, or D, sphenoethmoidal recess. So what do you think is the correct answer? So I can see many correct answers that it drains into the superior meatus. So this brings us to the end of our today's webinar. I hope you learned something useful from this webinar. आप लोगों के जो भी कमेंट्स हैं और जो भी क्वेश्चंस हैं वो प्लीज़ आप चैट बॉक्स में या फिर फेसबुक पे पेज के कमेंट में सेक्शन में आप पोस्ट कर दें. We will try to answer them one by one. So thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our today's session.